Hi, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Dave, and we're the IB English guys. Today, this is our third video where we talk about ghosts and the supernatural and the paper two. We're going to talk about writing a great body paragraph and you wearing our comparative hats.
Mr. Giles, you love these ghosts, don't you? Yeah, that's right, folks. We are going to do some body paragraphs today. Just a quick reminder, some key tips you need to think about while writing the paper two. The first thing you need to think about is answer the question in every single paragraph. What's number two, Giles?
We want to use references and details from these works.
Yeah, the third thing, we want to think about authorial choices and the effects of those choices. We want to be doing that throughout the response. And lastly,
we want to use comparative language and compare and contrast similarities and differences and wear the comparative hat.
Okay, why don't we go ahead and remind our viewers what the question was from our last video. Here we go. How and to what effect do two works of literature you have studied utilize ghosts, spirits, or the supernatural? All right, Giles, break it down. What do we need to think about?
We're thinking about how, we're thinking about features. We're also thinking about the effect and the significance of these ghosts. We could talk about ghosts, supernatural, or spirits. So
Okay.
we're thinking about making a choice of what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, I think for the sake of time today, let's just go ahead and skip that rudimentary outline and just get to that thesis we talked about in the last video.
Sounds good.
The thesis is as follows. The nature of the ghost and the circumstances of their deaths are vastly different in these two works, since one revolves around racial injustice of a large group of people and the other is about the unjust murder of one solitary king. However, both Ward and Shakespeare used the appearance of these ghosts to represent injustice, corruption, and instability, and remind the characters to remember and honor their memory and perhaps correct the mistakes of the past. I love it, Giles. We got two sentences. It looks like we are definitely going to focus on the similarities between the two with respect to injustice, corruption, and instability, but we are going to note the slight difference where one is about a group of people and the other one is thinking about a singular person. Is that correct?
That's right. And if you noticed in our previous video, we talked about the introduction in some detail and how that was put together. We do have an outline in mind, so if you remember, if we can just go over that really quickly, the first comparative point is the circumstances of their deaths. The second comparative point was talking about how the ghosts interact with other characters. The third comparative point is actually the point, the subject of these body paragraphs, how these characters, how these ghosts are stuck in a limbo state. This is what these two paragraphs are going to be about.
All right, let's dig into that. And before we dig into those paragraphs, let's just remind people what we need to think about. We have multiple things we need to keep in our mind as writers as we're going over these paragraphs.
Yeah.
Fire away, Giles. Tell me about the topic sentence.
All right, so the topic sentence in our minds needs to include the wording of the question. In this case, it's thinking about the ghost, but it's also connecting to a rich idea.
Yeah, and folks, remember, when you're writing that paragraph, you want to think about textual references. Those can either be direct quotes from the text or just references to this text that are not quoted, and you want to pin those to literary features, okay? So you get the reference and the feature together. Tell me about the author and the audience, Giles.
We're thinking about the author and the author making choices and the effect on the reader or the audience.
Yeah, of course, you want to have transition phrases or words between ideas, and also when linking paragraphs, you want to have good transitions between paragraphs, okay? So we want to keep that in mind, all while using comparative language throughout the response. There's a lot to do, Giles. Tell me a little bit about that comparative language. What are some words and phrases we can use?
Right, so we want to remember in our alternating method, in our second body paragraph where we bring in the second text, we need to be making comments about similarities and differences. So phrases and words for comparison to talk about similarities, you want to think about similarly. We want to think about using likewise, in similar fashion. Again, you can see there's lots of different phrases we can use.
You're doing great. Take over the contrast as well.
Well, when we're looking at differences, we can again use lots of different phrases, sentence starters, so to speak, like while or however or in contrast to, unlike. So we're thinking about using those clear markers of similarities and differences.
Students, you might want to note all of these are complex sentence structures. So if that's something you struggle with as a writer, you might want to brush up on the grammar of those complex sentences because
That's a good point.
You're going to need a lot of these for this paper, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Giles, let's dive in and read these body paragraphs. I'll take the first one and you can take the comparative part in the second body paragraph. Here we go. Limbo system. Limbo state.
That's right, limbo state. That's
Limbo
what the
state.
topic
We're
is.
in limbo.
The topic is about being stuck in limbo.
Since Shakespeare's play has many Catholic references and allusions, it is no wonder that Hamlet's ghost finds himself stuck in purgatory and in a limbo state until his son avenges his unjust murder. This is clearly felt in the ghost's powerful speech to Hamlet in Act 1, where he tells him he was murdered in his sleep and a foul potion was poured in his ear by his own brother Claudius. His tone is forceful and ominous, and the atmosphere is clearly tense as the audience and Hamlet hear in vivid detail of the murder and the rising action of the play. The unpleasant imagery used by Hamlet to describe his leprous skin and the foul condition of his body as a result should evoke disgust in the audience and be a strong impetus for our protagonist Hamlet to exact revenge. The ghost then reminds Hamlet that he was cut off in the blossoms of his sin. Shakespeare's use of the flower metaphor helps to show how King Hamlet is now stuck and did not have a chance to repent his sins. The Catholic illusions of being unannaled and disappointed, I couldn't see that, with no reckoning made, is a clear reference to the last rites when one can ask forgiveness for their sins before they die. It is also noteworthy that King Hamlet is wearing his armor throughout Act 1, and this costume choice helps to underscore his strength and warlike nature when he was king. Thus, King Hamlet's ghost is telling Hamlet of these injustices and the foul murder in order for him to be liberated from purgatory and establish order in the country. Get it, Giles. Next paragraph.
Okay. Like King Hamlet, Richie's ghost finds himself in a limbo state and is stuck in Parchment Prison, looking to escape the injustice he has felt. However, instead of a religious form of purgatory wanting to right his murder, Richie is a symbol of racial inequality and the savage violence that was inflicted on him and other African Americans. Thus, in this microcosm, Ward uses Richie as a representative of these young men who were unjustly imprisoned for petty crimes and cruelly mistreated. This is in contrast to King Hamlet's ghost, who is a solitary monarch whose death upsets the natural order. Richie's limbo state is described in a chapter where Ward uses the first-person narrative point of view of Richie as he describes floating above Parchment Prison, bearing witness to many decades of abuse inflicted on prisoners. This dreamlike atmosphere with the rich imagery of the white snake that transforms itself into a bird is perhaps Ward's way of inserting magic and the supernatural into her novel, and also perhaps to honor the West African beliefs and the traditions. Instead of Catholic roots, we see West African ones. In addition, unlike King Hamlet who wants revenge, Richie wants liberation, and he sees young Jojo as the person who can take him back to Pop, his father figure. His appearance in this chapter and his decision to ride with Jojo and his family back home is the first step in his liberation from his limbo state. However, contrary to King Hamlet, who clearly knows how he died and wants to know, Richie wants to see Pop so he can learn of his own death and wants others to know. This knowledge will be what he needs to finally find closure. Thus, while the ghost limbo states come from different origins, they both show the unfairness and they help to propel the plot of both works, as both King Hamlet and Richie need help from the living to be liberated from their suffering.
Mr. Giles, I'm not going to lie. These are big, scary paragraphs. What can we say out here to our viewers to help calm them down a little bit? Because these are hard to write. What are some things you're thinking about as a writer when you go through this process?
I'm thinking about my topic about limbo state, and I'm thinking about the scene where that is reflected. I'm anchored in that moment. For Hamlet, I'm thinking about this is Act 1, Scene 5. I'm connected to the ghost's speech. I'm trying to remember a few little snippets of language and just talk about what it means to be stuck in purgatory.
Okay, so really that first body paragraph, as we said multiple times, of the alternating style, you're firmly committed to Hamlet in this case, and you are not thinking about Sing Unburied Sin. Is that correct?
That's right. I'm thinking about Hamlet. This is the alternating style. I'm thinking about how is this reflected in Hamlet.
Okay, now when you go back to that comparative point in the second body paragraph, talk a little bit about your metacognitive process and what you're trying to do.
Immediately, I've got my comparative hat. Even my topic sentence, I say, like King Hamlet. I'm transitioning from Hamlet to Richie and Sing Unburied Sing. So I need to be thinking about, notice again, we've said this in the last video, a similarity is also a difference. They both have ghosts, they're both in limbo state. Yes, that's the similarity. The difference is the circumstances of the limbo state are different. The way that they're liberated is different. What they want is different.
Okay.
See what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean.
So it's kind of nuanced. Yes, they're both in that state, but they have some differences. This is why I talked about both similarities and differences in the same paragraph.
Yeah, folks, and if you look at this paragraph, you'll see a lot of comparative phrasing and language underlined, because basically every time Mr. Giles is making a point in that second body paragraph, he is linking back to that first text. He's linking back to Hamlet and illustrating whether it is a similarity or a difference, thus wearing the comparative hat, thus effectively executing the compare and contrast essay.
Yeah, and your point about it being long, that's true. I think everybody has to write what they can in the time they have and the pace that they write. So don't be intimidated by the length. Think about the strategies and what's there and write what you can in the time that you have. So you don't have to be writing huge volumes of material to do well on this. So
right, but folks,
you're right.
In the end though, we want you to think about, hey, you have a chance to prepare for this assessment. You have some works that you have picked out that you love, that you're passionate about, you've learned, you've memorized some references, you understand the way the author uses craft to shape meaning. You've studied, you can crank out some pretty nice paragraphs like this.
And you've got to practice this outside of class, and you've got to practice this on your own time when you can kind of practice just that paragraph and the comparative writing. The more you practice this, probably the more efficient you'll be with your writing, and this will and the more you write about these works that you're going to talk about, the more this is just going to come out on exam day.
So lastly, folks, don't be intimidated. Accept the challenge. This is a tough assessment, but we know that if you follow these tips and tricks, you will be successful. So keep on practicing, stay with the channel, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.